Hey guys, tonight we delve into Roman laundry habits. Imagine stepping into the bustling streets of ancient Rome, the sun beating down on the cobblestones, the smell of fresh baked bread wafting through the air, the steady rhythm of chariot wheels clacking against the stone roads, and the distant murmur of street vendors trying to sell their wares fill the air. As you walk through this vibrant city, you might notice something peculiar, a strange, sharp scent that cuts through the usual bustle of everyday life. It's a mixture of sourness, something caustic, and ammonia. Now, this might sound like something you'd want to avoid, but for the Romans, it was an everyday reality. The smell wasn't coming from some forgotten alley of rotting food. It was coming from the laundromats. Yes, in the heart of Rome, the Roman people used a very unexpected ingredient to keep their clothes spotless. Urine. The Romans, ever practical and resourceful, didn't see urine as waste. It was a valuable commodity. And you probably won't survive a day. In their world of laundry, it wasn't as simple as tossing your tunic into a modern washing machine. You had to think bigger. You had to get your feet wet, literally. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're curious, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine walking through the heart of ancient Rome, surrounded by the vibrant sounds of the marketplace and the clamor of Roman life. The air smells of fresh food and the musky scent of a busy city. Amidst the everyday hustle, you notice a peculiar aroma, a sharp, ammonia-like scent lingering in the air. It's not the smell of any food or fragrant herbs from the markets. No, this scent comes from something unexpected. The Fulonicae, the Roman laundromats. It's hard to imagine today, but back in ancient Rome, urine was a vital part of the laundry process. Romans didn't simply throw their dirty clothes into a tub of water. Oh no, they had a far more sophisticated and somewhat strange method of cleaning their garments. For the Romans, urine was their secret weapon. This liquid, which most people would immediately discard, was actually collected and put to use in a highly organized laundry system. The magic behind this method was ammonia. Urine contains ammonia, a powerful solvent that breaks down oils, dirt, and grease. When mixed with water, ammonia becomes even more potent. So, the next time you think about your laundry detergent, think back to the ancient Romans, who figured out how to make use of a substance most people today would rather avoid. They didn't have the luxury of modern soap, bleach, or washing machines, so they made do with what they had, and they were very clever about it. Now, let's imagine how this worked on a typical laundry day. Picture a bustling Fulonica, the Roman laundromat. This wasn't a small, cozy shop like those we have today. These were large, busy places where workers spent hours scraping, scrubbing, and soaking the garments in vats of liquid, mostly urine. The Fulonica wasn't just a laundry service. It was a center of labor, filled with the sound of workers stomping on the fabric, and the scent of ammonia filling the air. The process wasn't as simple as just soaking the clothes. No, Roman laundry was a complex system. First, the garments would be soaked in baths of urine to loosen up the oils and grime. After that, they were scrubbed and stomped on, yes, stomped on by the workers. This physical labor was essential to ensuring the ammonia penetrated deeply into the fabric, lifting the stains and dirt. Imagine the image. Workers, most of them slaves, standing knee-deep in vats of foul-smelling liquid, pressing their feet into the fabric in an effort to scrub away the dirt. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't comfortable, but it worked. It's easy to laugh at this method from our modern, sanitized perspective, but think about it. This was the Roman equivalent of a washing machine. The Romans didn't have modern tools to clean their clothes. Instead, they used the resources at hand, and urine became a cornerstone of their cleaning process. The more urine, the more cleaning power. There were even taxes on the collection of urine, and it was treated as a valuable commodity collected from public urinals and private homes. And it wasn't just anyone who had access to these philonici, while slaves and the lower classes worked tirelessly to clean the clothes. The ones wearing the pristine, gleaming garments were the Roman elites. For them, cleanliness wasn't just about hygiene, it was about status. A bright white toga was a symbol of wealth, power, and social standing. The more brilliant the whiteness, the higher the status. Clean clothes were an outward reflection of one's position in Roman society, and those in the upper echelons understood that their appearance mattered perhaps more than anything else. So, they paid the price for top-tier laundry services, which, as we've learned, involved a great deal of urine and a lot of manual labor. Historians still argue about how the Romans stumbled upon this method. Was it trial and error? Did they truly understand the chemical properties of ammonia and how it worked as a cleaning agent? Some believe they didn't know the science behind it. They just knew it worked. Others think they might have had some inkling of the chemical reaction at play. Either way, they used urine effectively, and it became integral to Roman laundry culture. So, as you can see, the humble Philonici and their urine-filled vats were much more than just places to wash clothes. They were part of the larger Roman cultural system, a system where cleanliness and appearance were paramount. Without the labor of the Philonici, the Romans would have struggled to maintain their societal image. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was about power, wealth, and perception. Now that we've learned about the essential role of urine in Roman laundry practices, let's take a closer look at the economic value that urine held in ancient Rome. In the modern world, we would never think of urine as anything more than waste to be discarded. But in Rome, urine was a precious commodity. It was so valuable, in fact, that the Roman government even taxed its collection. The importance of urine to Roman society can't be overstated. This humble bodily fluid played a crucial role in the daily workings of the empire. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Rome, dodging chariots and street vendors. When you pass a large jar filled with a yellow liquid, it's not lemonade, it's public urine collection. The Romans had a rather innovative system for collecting urine from the public. Citizens were encouraged, or sometimes even required, to contribute their urine to public containers that were placed in strategic locations around the city. It sounds strange, but it made perfect sense to the Romans. Given the demands of their laundry system, urine was collected not only from these public urinals, but also from homes, baths, and even the places where slaves lived and worked. The urine that was gathered wasn't just discarded, it was taken directly to the foulonicae, the laundromats, where it would be used to clean clothes. The more urine the laundromats had, the better they could operate, and the higher the demand for their services. Without it, the foulonicae would have had to rely on other, less effective methods to clean garments, which would have been both time-consuming and inefficient. The Roman government saw an opportunity to capitalize on this liquid gold. So, they introduced the urine tax, known as the vectigal urinae. This was a tax on the public's urine, which was collected and sold to the foulonicae. The amount of urine collected from the citizens was taxed, and the government used this as a source of revenue. Can you imagine that, having your bodily fluids taxed? But for the Romans, it was a perfectly logical way to generate income. In fact, the tax was so significant that it even became a point of public contention at times, with citizens grumbling about paying for something as simple and personal as urine. But while the vectigal urinae may seem unusual by today's standards, it speaks to the resourcefulness of the Roman people. They didn't let anything go to waste. Even a bodily fluid, which most people would consider a nuisance, was repurposed for a valuable service. This innovative thinking wasn't limited to the foulonicae. It was part of the larger Roman mindset that saw utility in every aspect of life. Even the seemingly disgusting or undesirable could be transformed into something useful, something valuable. Historians still debate whether this tax was applied universally throughout the empire, or whether it was a practice mostly reserved for the wealthier urban centers. Some believe that smaller villages or rural areas didn't see the same level of urine collection or taxation. Others argue that the practice was so integral to Roman life that it was implemented throughout the empire, with citizens everywhere being taxed for their contributions. One thing is certain, though: the Roman people were experts at maximizing every resource, and urine was no exception. Of course, this wasn't just about collecting the liquid. Once the urine arrived at the foulonicae, it was used in a carefully coordinated process. The workers would submerge clothes in large vats of diluted urine, and then they would start the grueling task of scrubbing and stomping on the fabric. The ammonia in the urine would break down the oils, grease, and dirt embedded in the fibers, and with each stomp and the scrub, the clothing would slowly start to brighten. It was labor-intensive work, but it was essential. After all, a clean toga was more than just a sign of good hygiene. It was a public statement of status and wealth. The elite of Rome wore their clean togas as a reflection of their social standing, and the foulonicae made it possible. This practice also demonstrates the importance of Roman slavery. Most of the labor in the foulonicae was carried out by slaves. They were the ones who waded through vats of ammonia-infused urine, working tirelessly to scrub, stomp, and clean the clothes, while the wealthy elite paraded around in gleaming togas. It was these slaves who did the hard work behind the scenes, making sure that Roman society could maintain its obsession with cleanliness. Historians continue to debate the ethics of slavery in Rome, but there's no denying that the system of forced labor was deeply woven into the fabric of Roman life. And the Fulonicia were no exception. In the grand scheme of Roman society, the practice of using urine as a cleaning agent wasn't just a quirky fact. It was a key part of the empire's daily functioning. The Fulonicae helped ensure that Roman society could project the image of order, wealth, and civility. Clean clothes were a visible marker of status, and the Fulonicae made sure that anyone willing to pay could achieve that polished, respectable appearance. And behind this polished image was a group of workers, slaves, and common citizens doing the difficult, unpleasant labor that made it all possible. Now that we've explored the economic role urine played in Roman laundry, let's take a closer look at the fascinating science behind why urine worked so effectively as a detergent. While it may sound strange, the science behind this ancient method of cleaning is far more sophisticated than we might think. To understand why urine was so effective, we need to take a deeper dive into the chemical composition of this bodily fluid and why it became so essential to Roman laundromats. At its core, the secret to urine's cleaning power lies in the ammonia content. Ammonia, a nitrogenous compound found in urine, is a highly alkaline substance. When ammonia is mixed with water, it becomes even more effective at breaking down oils, grease, and organic matter that commonly cause stains. This is because alkaline substances, like ammonia, have a strong ability to break down oils, fats, and protein substances that would normally stick to clothing. This chemical reaction is, in essence, the same principle we use today when we mix baking soda or detergent with water to clean greasy stains. In ancient Rome, the process was more hands-on. When clothing was brought to the Fulonicae, workers would soak the garments in vats of urine mixed with water, allowing the ammonia to break down the oils, dirt, and grime embedded in the fibers. The next part of the process was where the real work began. Workers would scrub, knead, and stomp on the fabric, agitating the mixture to ensure that the ammonia did its job. The workers would push the fabric against the sides of the vat, using their hands or feet to apply pressure, ensuring the ammonia-infused solution penetrated deep into the fibers. It wasn't just about dipping the clothes in urine. It was about making sure the fabric was worked through the chemical solution to break down the dirt. Historians still debate whether the Romans understood the precise chemical reactions at play. It's unlikely they fully understood the role of ammonia in breaking down organic matter in a scientific sense, but they certainly recognized the results. The fact that urine worked as an effective cleaning agent was proven time and again, and that's all the Romans needed to keep their clothes looking pristine. In many ways, the use of ammonia-based urine in Roman laundry was an example of the Romans using trial and error to arrive at an effective solution. Even if they didn't fully understand the science behind it, they may not have known the precise molecular breakdown, but they knew that it worked, and that's what mattered. What's even more remarkable is the fact that the Romans didn't just use urine for cleaning clothes. Ammonia, being a powerful chemical, had other applications in Roman society, particularly in medicine. Roman healers would sometimes use ammonia-based substances as disinfectants or antiseptics. While the effectiveness of ammonia in these medical uses is still debated, it shows that the Romans understood the multi-purpose nature of this compound. Urine's versatility wasn't just limited to the laundry. It had applications across various aspects of Roman life, making it a resource of considerable value. There's also an interesting debate about the physicality of the Roman cleaning process. Historians still argue whether the labor-intensive methods used in Phaulonicae were an early form of what we now understand as scrubbing or agitation in modern laundry. While modern machines rely on a tumbling action to clean clothes, the Romans used human muscle and movement. Workers would stomp on the fabric, applying pressure to release the oils and dirt. It was a manual form of agitation without the machines we use today, and it was effective, though it required considerable physical effort. This method of using human labor to agitate the fabric in the ammonia solution is an example of how the Romans adapted to the limitations of their technology, relying instead on manual labor to achieve the same results. While the Romans may not have had the sophisticated knowledge of chemical reactions that we have today, they were certainly experts in the practical application of the materials they had at their disposal. Ammonia from urine, combined with water and manual labor, created a cleaning process that was more effective than anything else available at the time. It was a simple, yet powerful, solution to a common problem, and it was something that could be replicated throughout the Roman Empire. However, the use of urine as a cleaning agent wasn't just effective, it was a practice rooted in Roman cultural values. The obsession with cleanliness and order wasn't simply about hygiene, it was about status. To have clean clothes in ancient Rome was a symbol of wealth, power, and social standing for the wealthy elites. Maintaining their pristine togas was a way to display their superiority over others. The bright, white fabric was a visual representation of their place in Roman society. Clean clothes meant they could afford to keep up appearances. Unlike the lower classes, who may not have had access to such luxury, the Phaulonicae played a pivotal role in maintaining this social order. The wealthy Romans could rely on the laundromats to keep their clothing in impeccable condition, while the lower classes either had to use simpler methods or rely on their own labor. In this way, Roman laundry was far more than a mundane task. It was a symbol of class, status, and identity. The labor that went into cleaning clothes was often hidden from view, performed behind the closed doors of the Phaulonicae, but it was essential to the functioning of Roman society. The use of ammonia to clean clothing wasn't just a quirk of ancient Roman culture, it was a reflection of the broader Roman ethos. The Romans were practical and resourceful, always looking for ways to make the most of what they had. Whether it was through the use of urine for cleaning clothes or the repurposing of other materials for various tasks, the Romans understood the value of turning waste into something useful. Their ability to adapt and innovate, even when faced with the most unlikely of resources, speaks to their ingenuity and practicality. Now that we understand the chemical and practical side of Roman laundry, let's shift focus and explore the spaces where this all happened, the Phuloniae, the Roman laundromats. These establishments were crucial to Roman society, playing an important role in keeping the populace looking pristine. If you thought laundromats were a modern phenomenon, think again. The Phuloniae were essentially the equivalent of today's professional dry cleaners, but with a unique twist. Imagine entering one of these bustling laundromats. The air is thick with the smell of ammonia, and the sounds of workers' feet stomping rhythmically on fabric fill the room. It's a scene far removed from the quiet hum of a modern washing machine, but no less vital to the ancient Roman way of life. Phuloniae were generally large, open spaces where clothes were washed, dried, and sometimes even pressed. These laundromats weren't just about washing clothes. They were centers of labor where slaves or workers would use their hands and feet to scrub and clean. They were equipped with large vats or containers where garments would be soaked in water and urine, allowing the ammonia to do its magic. The workers would then physically knead and stomp on the clothes to break up the grime, often with their bare feet. Yes, that's right, stomping on the clothes, much like grape stomping during winemaking. But for your togas and tunics, while it may sound unpleasant to us, this was the best system available. The workers in the Phuloniae knew their craft. They were skilled in the art of fabric care, which wasn't just about cleanliness, but about preserving the integrity of the fabric while making it look as pristine as possible. The Phuloniae were so integral to the Romans' way of life that they had workers who specialized in various aspects of the cleaning process. Some workers were responsible for the soaking and scrubbing. Others handled the pressing and finishing. Each garment, whether it was a basic tunic or an elaborate toga, required different care and attention. The process was extensive. Garments didn't just get a quick rinse and dry. After the clothes were scrubbed and stomped, they would be rinsed, wrung out, and sometimes even treated with other ingredients like oils or perfumes to enhance their fragrance. Imagine the scene again. Workers pressing the freshly cleaned fabric, scrubbing it down with scrapers or brushes to ensure it was free of any remaining dirt or stains. The work was labor-intensive and time-consuming, often taking hours or even days, depending on the condition of the clothing. But what's particularly fascinating is that these laundromats were not just for the elite. Sure, wealthy Romans could afford to have their clothing cleaned at the most prestigious Phuloniae, ensuring their togas were white as snow and impeccably pressed. However, the Phuloniae were essential to the whole of Roman society, serving people across the social spectrum. The common people, the plebeians, could also use these services, though their clothes likely didn't receive the same lavish treatment. For them, The Fulonicae were a place to maintain their basic dignity, ensuring they could present themselves as respectable in public. Without the means to employ private laundresses, historians still debate whether the Fulonicae were entirely open to the lower classes or whether there were specific laundromats reserved for the elite. Some argue that the wealthy had exclusive access to certain laundromats, where they could ensure that their garments were cleaned to the highest standard. Others contend that Fulonicae were generally open to all, and that the primary differentiator in service was the level of care each garment received. Either way, the Fulonicae played a significant role in Roman life, allowing individuals across the empire to maintain a respectable public appearance. But just how much did it cost to have your toga cleaned? The answer, of course, depended on who you were and what you could afford. The Fulonicae would charge for their services, and the price varied based on the complexity of the cleaning and the garment itself. A simple tunic might cost less to clean, while an elaborate toga or embroidered garment would require more care and time, driving up the price. It wasn't cheap to keep up with the Romans' obsession with cleanliness, especially for those who wanted their clothes to be as pristine as possible. The elite could afford to pay for the best services, ensuring that their togas were not only clean, but also beautifully pressed, ready for public display at the next political gathering or social event. The importance of the Fulonicae is also reflected in the fact that they were usually located near the heart of Roman cities. These laundromats were often found in busy urban centers, close to markets, baths, and other public spaces where people would gather. If you were a Roman citizen, the likelihood was that you passed a Fulonica at least once a day as you went about your business, and the sight and smell of these laundromats would have been an integral part of the city's daily atmosphere. Interestingly, some Fulonicae were so large that they could even clean the garments of soldiers and gladiators. The Roman military, always in need of fresh, clean uniforms, would rely on Fulonicae to ensure their soldiers maintained a neat and orderly appearance. Similarly, gladiators, whose blood-stained tunics were likely less than pristine after a fight, would need to clean their clothes before donning their armor for the next round of battles. These specific types of laundry were often more involved and required extra care, especially for garments that were heavily soiled. Imagine cleaning a gladiator's tunic after a bloody battle. It would need to be cleaned thoroughly to prevent any lingering stains or smells, a task that required a significant amount of time and effort. What's more, the Fulonicae weren't just confined to Rome. As the Roman Empire expanded across Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Fulonicae spread with it. By the time the empire reached its peak, Fulonicae could be found in all corners of the empire. From the hills of Britain to the sands of Egypt, the spread of Roman laundry techniques helped cement the empire's cultural influence, with local populations adopting the Roman practice of using urine to clean clothes, even if they didn't always understand the science behind it. Now that we've explored the mechanics of Roman laundromats, let's take a moment to examine the broader cultural significance of cleanliness in ancient Rome. While we've seen that keeping clothing pristine was a matter of status and class, it was also deeply tied to the Romans' obsession with order, beauty, and moral integrity. Cleanliness wasn't just about looking good, it was a reflection of Roman values, a symbol of a well-organized civil society. Romans equated cleanliness with virtue, and this belief permeated their daily lives in ways we might not expect. Imagine yourself in the bustling streets of Rome, walking past the elite citizens, draped in their perfectly white togas, their garments gleaming under the Mediterranean sun. Clean clothing was not just a symbol of wealth, it was a marker of moral uprightness. To be seen in public in dirty, worn clothing was a social faux pas, a sign of laziness, disregard for order, and a lack of respect for Roman customs. The social pressure to maintain clean and presentable attire was enormous, especially for those in the upper echelons of Roman society. In fact, it was almost as if your very moral character was judged based on the cleanliness of your clothing. The importance of cleanliness wasn't limited to just the elite, though even the lower classes, while they didn't have the same resources, were expected to keep their clothing in acceptable condition. Imagine a plebeian walking through the crowded streets of the Roman Forum, carefully avoiding the gaze of the patricians. If their tunic was stained or frayed, they would likely draw disapproving glances. Roman society was structured, and people knew their place. If a commoner wished to be seen as respectable, they had to maintain a certain level of cleanliness, even if it wasn't as pristine as the togas of the aristocrats. Historians still argue whether the obsession with cleanliness in Roman society was purely a social construct, or whether it had deeper cultural and moral implications. Some argue that it was simply about maintaining the outward appearance of order and civility, while others suggest that Romans genuinely believed that cleanliness was morally virtuous. It's possible that both ideas existed simultaneously, with the desire for social status and the pursuit of virtue intertwining. Whatever the case may be, it's clear that the Romans placed a high value on cleanliness. This extended far beyond their laundry practices. The role of the Philonici in this cultural obsession with cleanliness can't be overstated. These laundromats weren't just places to wash clothes, they were the lifeblood of Roman social order. Without them, the Romans' image of a clean, well-ordered society would have been impossible to maintain. Every toga, every tunic had to be spotless, and the Philonici were where this delicate balance of social expectations was upheld. The workers at these laundromats, many of whom were slaves, spent their days performing the labor that ensured the Roman elite could proudly wear their immaculate clothing in public. And while the workers may not have been in the spotlight, their labor was essential to maintaining the Roman ideal of cleanliness. But what about the everyday Roman citizen? How did they maintain this delicate balance of cleanliness and social order? We've seen that the elite could afford the best Philonicis. But what about the lower classes? Roman society was stratified, and the cost of laundry services wasn't always affordable for everyone. So, how did plebeians manage to keep their clothing clean without the resources of the elite? Well, it turns out that many common Romans still had access to some form of cleaning service, albeit a more basic one. Some plebeians would do their laundry themselves, using simpler techniques and homemade cleaning solutions. Others would rely on smaller, local laundromats, where they could afford a less expensive service. Though their garments may not have been cleaned to the same high standard. In a society where appearance was everything, even the poor had to find ways to maintain their clothing in acceptable condition. Whether it was scrubbing their tunics by hand or paying a modest fee to a local Folonica, they had to make do. The pressure to maintain clean clothing was immense, and for those without access to the elite laundromats, it was a constant struggle to keep up. The ideal of Roman cleanliness wasn't just for the wealthy, it was a cultural expectation that permeated every level of society. Interestingly, the Roman emphasis on cleanliness and personal appearance wasn't just about how you looked on the outside. It was about the moral implications of your appearance. Cleanliness was associated with virtue, while dirtiness and neglect were often seen as signs of moral failing. In many ways, the pursuit of cleanliness in ancient Rome was not just a social necessity, but a moral one. To be seen in dirty, torn clothing was to be seen as immoral, disorganized, and unworthy of Roman respect. In a society where status and reputation were everything, keeping your clothes clean was a crucial part of your identity. Historians still argue whether this obsession with cleanliness was rooted in Roman beliefs about social order, moral virtue, or both. Some suggest that the Romans believed cleanliness to be a reflection of internal order, a sign that an individual was disciplined, virtuous, and in control of their life. Others believe it was purely about outward appearances, a way for the Romans to distinguish themselves from the barbarians and maintain their superior status in the ancient world. Whatever the underlying motivation, one thing is clear: the Roman obsession with cleanliness shaped their society in profound ways, and the Folonici were central to that vision. As we've seen, cleanliness was deeply ingrained in Roman society, tied to both personal appearance and social order. But let's now turn our attention to the more physical side of Roman laundry practices, the labor that made all of this possible. We've talked about the workers in the Folonici, but what were their lives like? How did they fit into the larger structure of Roman society? And what was their role in maintaining the empire's obsession with cleanliness? The workers in the Folonici were mostly slaves, and their lives were often difficult and grueling. It wasn't just the physical labor involved, standing knee-deep in vats of ammonia-infused urine, scrubbing and stomping on clothing all day, that made their work so taxing. The Folonici were often overcrowded, with many slaves working side by side in close quarters. The smell of urine, the heavy lifting, and the constant scrubbing and kneading of fabric made for an unpleasant work environment. These workers didn't get to bask in the glory of the spotless garments they helped create. Instead, they worked behind the scenes, toiling away in the background, while the wealthy elite paraded around in their gleaming togas. What's most fascinating is the level of skill required in the Folonici. While it may seem like a simple task, Washing clothes, it was far more intricate than that. Clothes were not just washed, they were treated with care to ensure they retained their appearance and structural integrity. Stains had to be carefully removed without damaging the fabric, and the final pressing required delicate attention to detail to avoid wrinkles or creases. It was a skilled craft, and the workers were masters of their trade. Despite the unpleasant nature of the work, those who ran the Fulonice knew that it was the workers' expertise that kept the clothing clean and the Roman elite looking sharp. But the question remains, what drove the Roman Empire to place such an emphasis on cleanliness and the care of clothing? Was it purely a cultural obsession, or did it serve a deeper purpose within Roman society? Historians still debate the motivations behind the Roman obsession with pristine clothing. Some believe that it was a symbol of Roman civilization itself, a way to distinguish the Romans from the barbarians they conquered. Clean clothing, especially the toga, became a sign of Roman superiority. In Roman eyes, the more pristine your appearance, the more civilized you appeared. The clean, orderly image of Roman citizens helped reinforce the notion that Rome itself was an empire of order and control, as opposed to the chaotic, barbaric cultures beyond its borders. Others suggest that the focus on cleanliness had a more practical purpose, maintaining a healthy and orderly society. Cleanliness was often linked with health and hygiene in Roman culture. The elite could afford to maintain their garments with the help of Fulonicae, but the lower classes also had a stake in ensuring their clothes were presentable. Dirty clothing was associated with poor hygiene, which in turn could lead to social exclusion or even the spread of disease. By maintaining cleanliness, the Romans not only reinforced their social hierarchy, but also protected their public health. It was a reflection of their belief in the importance of personal discipline and societal order. Interestingly, the role of slaves in the Fulonicae underscores the broader inequalities of Roman society. While the elite paraded in their bright white togas, it was the slaves who performed the labor that made that possible. These slaves, often unseen and unnoticed, were the backbone of Roman society, providing the labor needed to maintain the image of cleanliness and order. And yet, despite their essential role, they were treated as little more than tools, laborers who were expected to work without recognition or reward. Historians still argue whether the role of slaves in the Fulonicae reflected the systemic exploitation of lower classes in Roman society, or whether it was simply a product of the social structures of the time. Some believe that the labor of slaves in the Fulonice was indicative of the larger power dynamics of the empire, where the elite enjoyed the fruits of others' labor, while the working classes were relegated to the most grueling and unpleasant tasks. Others argue that the role of slaves in Roman society was more complex, with some slaves gaining higher status and greater autonomy depending on their skills or position within the household or workplace. One of the most intriguing aspects of this debate is the fact that, despite their low status, the workers in the Fulonicae were highly skilled. Some workers even became experts in fabric care, mastering the complex art of washing, scrubbing, and pressing. In a sense, these workers represented the hidden layer of Roman society, one that was crucial to the functioning of the empire, but often overlooked. It's easy to think of the Romans as being solely concerned with the grandeur of their empire military conquests, magnificent architecture, and political power, but the truth is that the empire's success relied on the uncelebrated labor of people like those who worked in the Phalanx. These workers, often invisible to the wider Roman world, were essential to maintaining the cleanliness and order that the Romans prized so highly. In the end, the life of a Phalanx worker was one of labor and hardship. The work was physically demanding, and the environment was far from pleasant. Yet, it was an essential part of Roman society, supporting the cultural value of cleanliness and maintaining the public image of order and control. The Phalanx played a crucial role in ensuring that the Roman elite could continue to project an image of prosperity and sophistication, while the workers who kept the clothes clean went largely unrecognized. It's interesting to think about how these Roman workers in the Phalanx might have felt. Did they find satisfaction in their craft? Were they proud of their role in maintaining the image of Roman society? Or were they simply resigned to their fate as slaves? The answer is likely a mixture of both. Some may have taken pride in their work, knowing they were contributing to an essential service, while others may have simply endured the grueling labor as a means of survival. Regardless, the workers in the Phalanx were indispensable to the functioning of Roman society, and their contributions, though often overlooked, were crucial to maintaining the Roman ideal of cleanliness. Now that we've explored the labor side of Roman laundromats and the role of slaves in the system, let's shift gears and discuss the fascinating science behind why urine worked so effectively as a cleaning agent. It might seem odd to us today, but in ancient Rome, urine wasn't just waste, it was a powerful resource, crucial to the functioning of Phalanx. While the Romans didn't have the chemical knowledge that we have now, they were practical and keen observers of the world around them. They knew that urine, especially with its high ammonia content, could do the job that modern detergents and cleaning solutions do today. Ammonia, a compound found in urine, is a potent alkaline substance. Alkaline solutions have a unique ability to break down oils, fats, and organic materials. So, when mixed with water, urine becomes an effective solvent that can dissolve oils, grease, and dirt materials that commonly cause stains. Think about it. If you've ever used a cleaning product to remove grease or oil from a surface, you've likely used a product with a similar chemical composition. In fact, the ammonia in urine was so effective in cleaning garments that the Romans didn't need any modern chemical additives to achieve their desired level of cleanliness. The process in the Phalanx relied on this simple yet potent reaction. First, workers would soak the clothes in large vats of diluted urine, allowing the ammonia to break down any dirt or oils in the fabric. Then, the real work began. The worker slaves or laborers would knead, scrub, and stomp on the fabric to ensure the ammonia reached every fiber. Stomping on clothes in urine-filled vats wasn't just about getting the clothes wet. It was about agitating the fabric, allowing the ammonia to penetrate and do its job more effectively. The physicality of this process is striking when you think about it. In the absence of washing machines or modern cleaning equipment, the Romans relied on human effort to achieve results. Workers' feet acted as the agitator in the cleaning process, moving and stretching the fabric in ways that let the ammonia break down stubborn stains and dirt. It wasn't just a quick rinse and dry. It was a process that required time, effort, and expertise. But it wasn't just about getting clothes clean. The Philonici were also skilled at ensuring that garments remained intact. Even after repeated washings, the Romans were meticulous about the care of their clothes, and the Philonici workers knew that the delicate fabrics, often fine wool or linen, had to be treated gently to preserve their structure. Washing methods weren't one-size-fits-all. Certain garments required special attention to detail, and the workers in the Philonici had the expertise to handle each piece with care, ensuring that it came out clean and undamaged. This careful, knowledgeable approach to fabric care was one of the reasons why Roman laundry practices were so effective, and it's why Philonici workers were in high demand. Interestingly, historians still debate how much the Romans knew about the science behind their cleaning methods. It's likely they didn't understand the chemical reactions happening when ammonia dissolved oils or dirt. They may have simply recognized that urine worked as an effective cleanser through trial and error. In fact, much of Roman society's innovation was based on this approach, practical experimentation that yielded useful results without necessarily understanding the scientific principles behind it. Some modern researchers have attempted to recreate Roman cleaning methods to understand them better. They've tested urine as a cleaning agent and found that, indeed, it works, especially when combined with water. This isn't to say that urine is the best cleaning solution by today's standards, but it's a fascinating example of how the Romans used natural resources to solve practical problems. What we view as a repellent waste product, they turned into something useful, proving their resourcefulness and ingenuity. It's worth noting that ammonia, while effective at cleaning, also had a disinfecting effect. In a world without antibiotics or modern disinfectants, the use of ammonia could have helped reduce the spread of bacteria or infections, particularly in a city as large and densely populated as Rome. The Philonici, where clothes from all walks of Roman life were cleaned, were also places where the importance of hygiene intersected with the broader concept of Roman order and structure. Cleanliness wasn't just a matter of appearance. It was also about maintaining public health. In addition to cleaning clothes, ammonia was also used in various other ways in ancient Rome. For example, it had medicinal applications as an antiseptic. Roman physicians used ammonia-based compounds to disinfect wounds, although it was likely less effective than modern antiseptics. Still, it's remarkable that the Romans understood the value of ammonia, even if they didn't fully understand its chemical properties. Their application of urine went far beyond just laundry. It was woven into the fabric of Roman daily life, from cleaning clothes to medical treatments. What's especially interesting is the fact that ammonia's use in cleaning wasn't confined solely to the Fulonaikai. It was also used in other industries, such as dyeing fabrics, where its strong solvent properties could be used to fix colors or cleanse the fabric before dyeing. The versatility of ammonia shows just how resourceful the Romans were with the materials available to them. They didn't need modern chemicals or machinery. They made do with what they had, using natural substances in multiple ways to improve their quality of life. Even today, we still use ammonia in cleaning products, from household cleaners to industrial strength degreasers. It's a testament to the lasting impact of Roman ingenuity that their understanding of this chemical compound has survived for centuries. The Romans, with all their advanced technology, may not have had modern science, but they knew how to make the best use of what they had, and they did it with the same meticulous attention to detail that we now associate with modern-day industrial innovation. Now that we've seen the practical, chemical, and cultural importance of Roman laundry practices, let's focus on the broader context of how this system fit into the structure of Roman society. The Fulonikai, like many aspects of Roman life, were not just about functionality. They were an integral part of a larger social system, one that reinforced power structures and social hierarchies. To truly understand the significance of the Fulonikai, we need to look at how they interacted with the Roman class system and the reliance on slave labor, particularly the role of women in these laundromats. First, let's consider the labor force. As we've discussed, most of the work in Fulonikai was done by slaves. These slaves, many of whom were captured during military campaigns or born into servitude, were assigned to perform the heavy, repetitive tasks required to keep Roman society running smoothly. In the case of the Fulonikai, this meant spending long hours in ammonia-filled vats, scrubbing and stomping on garments to make them shine. It was grueling, physically demanding work that few would willingly choose. But what's especially important to note is the role of women in these laundromats. In a society where women were largely relegated to the domestic sphere, the work they did in Fulonikai became a key part of the labor force that maintained the social order. Women, especially enslaved women, were often tasked with handling the laundry. Their role wasn't just about cleaning. It also involved maintaining the fabric's integrity, which required knowledge of different materials, stains, and the precise amount of scrubbing needed for each garment. While men were often involved in more physically demanding tasks in other industries, women's labor in the Fulonikai was central to the fabric care process. They were not just workers, they were experts in their field, knowledgeable in the care of fabric and the precise methods required to keep clothing looking its best. Historians still debate how much agency women had in this system. Some argue that enslaved women in the Fulonikai were essentially no different from other slaves in Roman society, subject to exploitation and harsh conditions, with little opportunity for freedom or autonomy. Others suggest that, in some cases, Female slaves working in Pholonaikae may have had a higher status compared to other slaves, especially if they were skilled and could oversee the cleaning process. It's important to remember that the labor of women in these laundromats wasn't purely physical. They were, in a sense, artisans, using their knowledge of fabric care to ensure the final product was of the highest quality. But the fact remains that most workers in the Pholonaikae were still bound by the Roman system of slavery, while their labor was essential to the Roman obsession with cleanliness. Their status remained subjugated. Slaves, regardless of their expertise, were still viewed as property, and their labor was often undervalued, even though they were integral to the functioning of the empire. This dynamic reflected the broader inequalities in Roman society, where the elite enjoy the fruits of others' labor, and the lower classes, including slaves and women, were relegated to the hardest and most unpleasant work. The role of women in the Pholonaikae was also emblematic of the larger gender dynamics in Roman society. While Roman women, especially those of the elite, had some influence in domestic affairs, their roles in the public sphere were severely limited. Women's work in Pholonaikae was another example of how their labor was both crucial and invisible. The men who wore the gleaming togas paraded their wealth and status in the public eye. But it was the women often enslaved who did the labor that made that appearance possible. The invisible labor of women was a constant in Roman society, and while it may not have been recognized or celebrated, it was essential to the empire's functioning. The use of slaves in Pholonaikae, and particularly the role of women, also speaks to the wider system of exploitation in Roman society. Slavery, which was deeply entrenched in Roman life, allowed the elite to live in luxury, while the labor of enslaved people, many of them women, was essential to maintaining that luxury. The system was symbiotic in a way. The elite depended on the work of the slaves, and the slaves' labor allowed the elite to continue their societal dominance. However, it was a system that was built on inequality, and the labor of the Pholonaikae workers was just one example of the exploitation that existed within the Roman social structure. At the same time, it's worth noting that the work in the Pholonaikae, though grueling, wasn't just about subjugation. It was also an important part of Roman culture. Cleanliness, as we've seen, was deeply tied to moral integrity and social status. The Pholonaikae weren't just a practical necessity. They were emblematic of the Roman obsession with order and discipline. The slaves and workers who operated the Pholonaikae were performing a vital service that maintained the Roman image of cleanliness and civility, even if they themselves went unrecognized in the process. Historians still debate whether the Roman system of slavery was more humane than slavery in other ancient cultures. While some argue that Roman slaves had certain legal rights, others point out that the physical demands of labor in places like the Pholonaikae were harsh, and the treatment of slaves was often cruel. The debate is far from settled, but one thing is clear: the work performed by slaves, particularly those in the Pholonaikae, was essential to Roman society, even though their labor was not properly acknowledged or compensated. The Fulonica, then, were not just places of laundry, they were microcosms of Roman society itself. In these laundromats, the complex interplay of class, gender, and power played out. The slaves, most of them women, worked tirelessly to maintain the public image of cleanliness that was so important to Roman culture. While the elite enjoyed the results of their labor, it was a system built on inequality, but also on the understanding that the outward appearance of order and civility was crucial to maintaining the empire's power. As we continue to unpack the significance of the Fulonicae and their place in Roman society, it's crucial to explore how these laundromats were not just places of labor, but also hubs of social interaction and commerce. While we've already touched on the economic importance of the Fulonicae, both in terms of their role in providing laundry services and their position within the Roman social hierarchy, there is much more to their cultural and social relevance. Fulonicae were not isolated, sterile spaces. They were active parts of the urban landscape, places where people gathered, interacted, and exchanged more than just dirty clothes. Consider the bustling life of a Roman Fulonica. If you were a Roman citizen strolling through the busy streets of the city, you would encounter various public spaces that were central to daily life: markets, baths, taverns, and of course, Fulonicae. These laundromats weren't just for washing clothes. They were places where people came to do business, socialize, and even catch up on the latest gossip, much like modern-day laundromats. The Fulonicae were informal social hubs where people, whether slaves, free citizens, or the wealthy elite, could engage in conversation, make deals, and exchange news. This aspect of the Fulonicae adds another layer to their role in Roman society. The workers who labored in the Fulonicae were far from isolated. They were embedded within the social fabric of Rome. The presence of wealthy Romans in these spaces made them more than just utilitarian service providers. They were venues where Roman life, culture, and politics intersected. While it was the slaves and lower classes who did the actual laundry work, the elite would have visited the Fulonicae to see their togas and tunics cleaned, pressed, and made ready for public appearances. In a sense, these laundromats were not just places of labor. They were sites of status and social engagement. You could see, at any given time, citizens from all walks of life, merchants, soldiers, and aristocrats, waiting in line or exchanging pleasantries while their clothes were cared for. In these small but significant ways, they all Fulonicae were deeply woven into the social fabric of Roman life. Moreover, the Fulonicae weren't just places for people to drop off their garments. They were active centers of commerce in a larger economy of service industries. Rome's urban landscape was full of these service providers, public baths, butchers, potters, and Fulonicae, each with its own role in maintaining the rhythm of Roman daily life. For the wealthy Romans, keeping up appearances was an essential part of their political and social success, and paying for Fulonica services was a necessary expense. But for the common Roman, visiting the Fulonicae meant maintaining basic standards of cleanliness and dignity, which in turn allowed them to be accepted within the urban environment. The importance of these services grew as the Roman Empire expanded. Roman cities in distant provinces, whether in Spain, Gaul, or Egypt, would adopt Roman-style laundromats as the empire's influence spread. In these new cities, Pholoniki helped integrate Roman customs and practices into the local landscape as the empire advanced. It wasn't just the military or governance that Romanized new territories, it was the lifestyle itself, with cleanliness and order being central to Roman identity. Pholoniki became a symbol of Roman culture, and in cities far beyond Italy, people could be found washing their clothes in the same way their Roman counterparts did, soaking them in ammonia-rich urine, scrubbing, stomping, and pressing until they gleamed. But the spread of Pholoniki also raises an important point about the legacy of Roman practices. While Roman laundry methods may seem outdated or even primitive by today's standards, they were a part of a system that kept the empire's cities clean, orderly, and productive. As the empire expanded and urbanized, the demand for services like the Pholoniki grew. The role of laundry services as a small but vital component of Roman infrastructure speaks to the empire's larger ambition for order and control. It wasn't just about conquering lands, it was about creating a well-ordered society where everything had its place. Even the simplest of tasks like laundry, cleanliness was seen as a reflection of Roman civilization itself. However, the spread of the Pholoniki was not entirely without complication. In many regions, the methods used to clean clothes were adapted or changed to fit local customs. For example, in Egypt, which had its own ancient laundry traditions, the Roman system of urine-based cleaning was likely integrated with older methods, creating a hybrid approach. In some places, the Romans even introduced more advanced techniques, such as using different plant-based solutions to treat fabrics or incorporating natural soap made from oils and ash. This melding of Roman practices with local customs reflects the broader flexibility of Roman imperialism, its ability to incorporate diverse cultural elements while maintaining a cohesive identity across its vast empire. Historians continue to debate the extent to which the Roman Pholoniki shaped the cultures they encountered. Some argue that the Pholoniki were a critical element of Romanization, spreading not only a cultural obsession with cleanliness, but also economic and social systems that reinforce Roman power. Others suggest that the integration of local laundry practices with Roman techniques helped create a more fluid, hybrid form of Roman culture, one that wasn't rigidly imposed, but instead adapted and transformed by the people of the provinces. The legacy of Roman laundry practices is also tied to the way these systems influenced later European cleaning methods. By the time of the Middle Ages, the use of urine in washing garments had largely fallen out of favor, but many of the methods for caring for fabric, pressing clothes, and maintaining hygiene would persist. The process of scrubbing, soaking, and kneading garments eventually gave way to soap making and more modern forms of fabric care. But the Romans' early innovations laid the groundwork for future advances. Even today, the basic principles of using chemical compounds to break down dirt and oils are still at the heart of modern laundry products. In a way, the Phalanx helped ensure the continued cleanliness of Roman cities and the well-being of Roman citizens. They played a role in maintaining social harmony by allowing people to keep up appearances, engage in commerce, and interact with others in public spaces. The Phalanx were not just places of labor, they were essential to the Roman way of life, ensuring that Roman civilization stayed clean, orderly, and perpetually polished, both literally and figuratively. As we continue our exploration of Roman laundry practices, let's now dive into the decline of the Phalanx and the eventual transition away from the use of urine in washing clothes. As with most aspects of Roman society, the Phalanx didn't remain static. As the empire evolved, so did its practices and technologies, and what was once an essential part of Roman life slowly became obsolete. The fall of the Western Roman Empire marked the beginning of this decline, but the process was gradual. New developments in soap making, changes in Roman society, and shifts in the economy all contributed to the eventual disappearance of urine as a standard cleaning agent. When we think of the end of Roman practices, we often imagine a dramatic collapse, but the decline of the Phalanx was not an event. It was more like a slow fade. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE didn't happen overnight, and neither did the disappearance of its laundry practices. As the Roman Empire fractured and the political and economic systems crumbled, many urban infrastructures fell into disrepair. The lavish Roman baths and the highly organized public services, including laundromats, started to become less accessible or outright abandoned. With the fall of Rome, many of the intricate social systems that had supported these services fell apart as well. But the decline of the Phalanx didn't just have to do with the fall of the empire. The rise of Christianity and the spread of monasticism during the early Middle Ages also contributed to the shift in Roman practices. Christianity introduced new ideas about cleanliness and morality, emphasizing asceticism and the rejection of luxury, which eventually affected Roman norms. As Christian monastic communities began to establish their own ways of living, many of the lavish public baths and the expensive practices associated with cleanliness fell out of favor. The Christian values of simplicity and austerity led to a cultural shift away from the Roman obsession with outward appearances. Meanwhile, the practical aspects of laundry were changing. By the early Middle Ages, soap making had become more widespread in Europe, replacing the need for ammonia-laden urine. Soap, made from animal fats and plant ashes, was far more effective and less pungent than urine, and it didn't require the complex and labor-intensive process that Roman laundry had. While the exact timeline for the spread of soap is debated, its use started to spread across Europe, gradually replacing urine in the cleaning process. By the 10th century, soap had become a common household item in parts of Europe, particularly in the more urbanized regions that had been influenced by Roman practices. With the introduction of soap, the Follonica began to disappear from Roman cities. Soap was cheaper, easier to use, and far more efficient than urine. As the Roman Empire fractured and the ancient practices of laundry care faded away, the labor-intensive process of stomping on clothes in ammonia-filled vats was no longer necessary. In its place came simpler, less time-consuming methods of fabric care that would eventually pave the way for modern laundry techniques. By the time of the Renaissance, soap was well established as the primary cleaning agent in Europe, and the use of urine in washing garments had almost entirely disappeared. But while the Follonicai may have faded with the collapse of the Roman Empire, their legacy is far from forgotten. The meticulous care the Romans took in cleaning their garments and their inventive use of urine left a lasting impact on future societies. Many of the ideas behind Roman fabric care, such as scrubbing, soaking, and pressing clothes, would be carried forward into the Middle Ages. Soap itself would evolve over time, and by the 18th century, the development of modern detergents and washing machines would revolutionize the way we care for our clothing. Interestingly, some aspects of the Roman laundry process persisted in local practices even after the fall of Rome. In rural areas, people continue to use simpler methods of washing clothes, such as soaking garments in water or even urine. In some regions, the use of urine for cleaning remained part of traditional practices long after it had been abandoned in the cities. This is a reminder that Roman innovations didn't just vanish overnight. They evolved and were adapted to fit the changing needs and cultures of the post-Roman world. In modern times, we look back at the Romans' use of urine in their laundry processes with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. It seems strange to think that something we now associate with waste was once considered a valuable resource. But the Romans saw things differently. They were pragmatic, and their ability to turn something as unpleasant as urine into an essential tool for maintaining cleanliness speaks to their ingenuity. The process may have been labor-intensive and far from glamorous, but it worked, and it was effective enough to be used across the empire for centuries. The Roman practice of cleaning clothes with urine also highlights how much we take modern conveniences for granted. Today, we have washing machines, detergents, and a whole range of cleaning products that make caring for our clothes simple and fast. We no longer need to spend hours scrubbing and stomping on garments, but the Romans did, and they did it with great skill and resourcefulness. While we might chuckle at the idea of using urine to clean clothes, we can't deny the brilliance behind their methods. In many ways, the Romans were pioneers in fabric care, and their techniques laid the groundwork for many of the cleaning methods we still use today. So, while the Follonica and the practice of using urine may have faded from the historical record, the legacy of Roman ingenuity and their dedication to cleanliness lives on. As we go about our modern-day laundry routines, we might do well to remember that even the most unlikely of resources can be turned into something valuable, and that sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity and hard work to get the results we want. As we move further into the decline of Roman laundry practices and their evolution into the Middle Ages, it's worth considering the broader cultural shifts that contributed to the transformation of everyday life in the post-Roman world. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire wasn't just a political upheaval, it was a cultural shift that influenced every aspect of life, including cleanliness and fabric care. As we mentioned, the transition from the Roman Fulonicae to medieval laundry methods wasn't an immediate change, but a gradual evolution. To understand this shift, let's take a closer look at the impact of the fall of Rome, the rise of Christianity, and the spread of soap making on laundry practices in Europe. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE marked the end of a unified political entity, but it didn't mean the end of Roman influence. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive for several more centuries, preserving many aspects of Roman culture, including aspects of public cleanliness and hygiene. However, in the West, the collapse of central authority led to a period of fragmentation and decline in many urban areas. As Roman cities began to shrink and political and economic systems became more localized, so too did public services like the Fulonicae. In many places, infrastructure deteriorated, and the meticulous care of clothing, once central to Roman society, became less of a priority. In the midst of this decline, another significant factor reshaped the landscape of Roman cleanliness practices: the rise of Christianity. The Christian Church, which became increasingly influential in the post-Roman world, introduced a new set of values that affected every aspect of life, including personal hygiene. Christianity, with its emphasis on asceticism and simplicity, placed less importance on outward appearance and cleanliness than Roman society had it, where Romans had believed that pristine clothing was a reflection of moral integrity. Christians began to focus more on inner purity, humility, and spiritual cleanliness. As Christianity spread throughout Europe, so too did these new attitudes. The lavish public baths and Fulonicae that had flourished in Roman cities became less common. In many cases, the public baths, which had also doubled as social hubs, fell into disrepair or were abandoned altogether. The Romans, who had embraced cleanliness as a symbol of civilization, were gradually replaced by a more ascetic Christian ethos that placed less emphasis on the physical body and more on spiritual matters. Cleanliness still had its place in Christian doctrine, but it was now considered a private matter, no longer something to be flaunted in public. However, the decline of Roman bathhouses and laundromats didn't mean that people ceased to care about cleanliness altogether. As we move into the early Middle Ages, we see the emergence of a different kind of hygiene practice, often centered around private and monastic spaces. Christian monks, who lived in secluded communities, were among the few who continued to maintain regular washing habits, albeit on a much smaller scale. These religious communities were not only places of prayer and study, but also places where personal cleanliness and hygiene were closely linked with spiritual purity. Monks were known for their strict routines, which included regular washing of the body and, to a certain extent, their clothing. In this context, cleanliness became more about personal piety than public appearance. But even with the rise of monastic hygiene practices, public cleanliness did not entirely disappear from European society. Over time, people in urban centers began to adapt and develop new methods of caring for their clothes. By the 7th and 8th centuries, soap making had become more widespread across Europe, thanks to the influence of the Moors and the spread of Arabic scientific knowledge. Soap, made from animal fats and ashes, was much more efficient and pleasant than using urine for cleaning clothes, and it quickly gained popularity. Soap making in medieval Europe was initially a labor-intensive process, much like Roman fabric care. Early soaps were often made by boiling animal fat with plant ash, which would create a mixture of lye that was effective in removing dirt. Soap wasn't a commercial product yet, and it was primarily made by individuals or families for their personal use. It was used for both washing clothes and personal hygiene. Though in medieval Europe, bathing was still relatively rare, the process of making soap in the medieval period was still rudimentary, but it was a far cry from the ammonia-based solutions used by the Romans. By the 12th century, soap making had become a highly valued craft in European cities, especially in places like Marseille, France, which became known for its soap production. What's fascinating about this transition is that, despite the decline of the Phoulonicae and the use of urine, the basic principles of Roman laundry care persisted. The concept of using powerful solvents, whether it was ammonia from urine or the alkaline properties of lye, remained essential to cleaning. And while modern washing machines and detergents have evolved far beyond these ancient methods, the underlying idea of using natural compounds to break down oils and dirt remains unchanged. Moreover, the decline of the Roman approach to laundry also highlighted the shift in societal values. The Middle Ages saw a move away from public cleanliness, which was tied to social status and power, towards more private practices that emphasized humility, personal purity, and internal morality. This shift reflected the broader changes in medieval European society, where the focus was less on outward appearance and more on inward virtue. As we look back on the legacy of Roman laundry practices, it's interesting to consider how the ancient obsession with cleanliness, social status, and outward appearance eventually gave way to a new set of values in the medieval period. Clean clothing in the Roman world was a symbol of wealth, social order, and Roman identity. By the time of the Middle Ages, cleanliness became a more private matter, linked to religious and personal virtue. The Phoulonicae, once bustling with activity and serving as hubs of Roman life, faded into history, but their legacy lived on in the personal hygiene practices of monastic communities and the development of soap making. And while we might no longer be using urine to clean our clothes, the importance of cleanliness, whether for social, moral, or practical reasons, has continued to play a significant role in shaping our modern world. The persistence of the Roman obsession with cleanliness, despite the changing cultural and technological landscape underscores the timeless human desire to maintain order, beauty, and respectability in our lives. As we continue exploring the fascinating evolution of laundry practices, let's reflect on the transition from Roman to medieval Europe and the impact this had on clothing care. While the fall of the Roman Empire may have slowed the development of full-scale public laundromats, it didn't mark the end of Roman influence on hygiene or fabric care. The decline of the full onnaise and the eventual replacement of urine with soap marked a shift not only in cleaning practices but also in the broader cultural approach to cleanliness, particularly in the changing values of the Middle Ages. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, much of the advanced infrastructure and public services that were characteristic of Roman cities disappeared. Fulonike, with their labor-intensive yet effective methods of clothing care, were no longer a staple of European cities. This was part of the broader transformation from a highly organized empire to the fragmented, often rural societies of medieval Europe. Roman-style public baths, the grand forums where people gathered, and the philonicae that kept society's garments clean were all casualties of the decline. However, the practice of maintaining cleanliness did not disappear entirely with the collapse of the empire. While public bathhouses declined in use, monasteries became the focal point of many aspects of Roman hygiene traditions. Early medieval monks, particularly in regions like Ireland, were keen on maintaining cleanliness as part of their spiritual and communal life. Their daily routines included regular washing of the body, and even the care of their clothing was considered important for both hygiene and spiritual purity. This continued the tradition of cleanliness as not just a social requirement, but as a moral one. As Christian monasticism spread throughout Europe, the emphasis on personal cleanliness and spiritual purity also took root. The Roman obsession with public display of cleanliness gave way to a more personal, inward focus during the medieval period. This shift was particularly evident in the practice of washing clothes. While it wasn't the public spectacle it had been in Rome, cleanliness was still an essential part of everyday life. Monasteries continued to wash and care for the clothes of their inhabitants. And as the medieval period progressed, more local laundries began to appear, often run by women or monastic orders. The role of women in this period remained integral, especially in terms of personal and household hygiene. Women were responsible for the care of their family's clothing, though the practice of washing was more rudimentary than what the Romans had done. Women would wash clothes in streams or basins, with no more sophisticated means than soap made from animal fats or ashes, which was a far cry from the ammonia-based cleaning methods of the Romans. Even though it lacked the intricacy of Roman laundry, the desire for cleanliness persisted. Soap, as we mentioned earlier, began to replace ammonia-based solutions like urine for cleaning. It's fascinating to consider how the soap-making process developed. Early soaps in Europe were typically made from animal fats combined with plant ashes, which created a basic alkali solution capable of removing dirt and oils. This soap wasn't refined like the soaps we use today. It was a rough, crude product that served its purpose but was still a significant step forward in fabric care. Soap's emergence in Europe during the medieval period was heavily influenced by Arab techniques, particularly from the regions where the Moors ruled. Arabic scholars and chemists had already developed much more advanced soap-making methods that spread through Spain and other parts of Europe. Thanks to trade and cultural exchange, the shift from urine-based cleaning to soap not only made the cleaning process more pleasant, but also more efficient. Soap was an effective cleaning agent, and it didn't require the intensive physical labor that the Roman method did. No longer would workers need to stomp on clothing in vats. Soap allowed for quicker, less labor-intensive methods of washing, which could be done in basins or rivers with less effort. And this, of course, paved the way for more advanced laundry technologies in the centuries to come. This transition was also a reflection of changing social and cultural dynamics. While the Romans had used cleanliness to assert their superiority and social status, medieval Europe, influenced by Christianity, was less concerned with outward appearance. Cleanliness was still important, but the cultural emphasis had shifted toward personal purity rather than public display. The decline of the Phalanxes, with their elaborate, labor-intensive methods, reflected the movement away from outward social status and toward a more personal, inward focus. People were no longer expected to keep their togas pristine for public view now. The emphasis was placed on personal virtue, and cleanliness became an extension of that inner purity. But despite the changes, the legacy of Roman laundry practices lived on in the form of local laundries that sprang up across Europe. These were often run by women who took on the task of washing clothes for their neighbors or local communities. They used soap, herbs, and simple scrubbing methods, all reminiscent of the Roman Phalanxes, albeit less complex. In this way, the tradition of fabric care continued, even if the methods had become simpler. Interestingly, the legacy of Roman fabric care didn't disappear entirely. In the later Middle Ages and even into the Renaissance, people continued to refer back to Roman methods as a kind of gold standard for cleanliness. The Romans' use of ammonia and their intricate laundry systems were still seen as highly advanced, and the knowledge of these practices, though no longer commonly used, was passed down through generations. It's clear that the Romans set the foundation for modern fabric care, even though the specifics of their methods became less common with time. In the 19th century, the development of commercial laundry services and the introduction of washing machines would revolutionize the way people cared for clothes. These modern advancements were based on the same principles that the Romans had pioneered, using chemical compounds to break down oils and dirt. While modern laundry services are much more efficient and no longer require ammonia-based solutions, the legacy of the Romans' ingenuity can still be seen in every detergent we use today. So, while the Romans' specific methods may have faded with the collapse of their empire, their influence on the history of cleanliness is undeniable. Their innovative use of urine as a cleaning agent, the development of the Phalanxes as centers of labor and commerce, and their obsession with the importance of a well-kept appearance set the stage for future advancements in laundry technology. And even today, we continue to use principles first developed by the Romans to keep our clothes clean, albeit in a much more modern and automated way. As we near the conclusion of our journey through the history of Roman laundry, it's time to take a step back and reflect on the broader implications of these ancient practices. The Fulonicae, while seemingly mundane and often overlooked in the grand narrative of Roman history, were emblematic of the Roman approach to life itself. They represented a society that was methodical, practical, and obsessed with order and cleanliness. But more than that, they were also a microcosm of Roman values, values that would influence countless generations long after the fall of the empire. Let's begin by considering what the Fulonicae tell us about Roman society. They were more than just laundry service providers. They were central to maintaining the very image of Roman civilization. To the Romans, appearance wasn't just about vanity, it was an expression of their identity. Roman society was built on principles of order and structure, and cleanliness was seen as a reflection of those principles. Clean clothes, particularly the toga, became a visible marker of one's social status and respectability. The Fulonicae played a key role in upholding this ideal, allowing the wealthy elite to project an image of civility, power, and discipline. In Roman culture, there was a deep connection between cleanliness and morality. To the Roman elite, the act of wearing a clean toga wasn't merely a matter of personal preference, it was a matter of virtue. Cleanliness was often linked with inner purity, and the act of keeping one's clothes pristine became symbolic of one's discipline, moral integrity, and place in society. Those who maintained their garments, ensuring they were bright and spotless, were seen as individuals who adhere to Roman values, order, respectability, and control. In many ways, the Fulonicae were not just about laundering clothes, they were about maintaining Roman identity itself. They helped reinforce a social hierarchy where the wealthy elite flaunted their immaculate togas as symbols of power, while the lower classes, who could not afford the same luxury, worked tirelessly to maintain their own level of cleanliness. The workers who performed the labor in the Fulonicae, many of them slaves, were the unsung heroes of this system. Though their hard work enabled the elite to maintain their social status, their contributions were largely invisible, and they were rarely acknowledged in the public eye. The irony here is profound. While the elites paraded their spotless garments as a sign of their superior status, the real work of keeping their clothes clean was done by the lower classes. The Fulonicae were places where power dynamics played out, where the wealthy maintained their image, and the poor and enslaved labored to support it. This system, based on exploitation and inequality, was central to Roman society. It speaks to the broader issue of how wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority worked to maintain the system's order. But while the Fulonicae were vital to the Roman way of life, they were also emblematic of the larger forces that eventually led to the empire's decline. Roman society, at its height, was a well-oiled machine that valued cleanliness, order, and discipline. However, as the empire fractured and its political and economic systems crumbled, these values became increasingly difficult to maintain. The fall of the Western Roman Empire wasn't just a political collapse, it was a cultural one. As the empire collapsed, so did the infrastructure that supported Roman ideals of order and cleanliness. With the rise of Christianity and the fall of Roman political power, the values associated with cleanliness and order began to shift. Christianity, with its focus on humility and asceticism, placed less emphasis on outward appearance and cleanliness. The early medieval period saw a move away from the Roman obsession with physical cleanliness, as spiritual purity became the focus. Personal hygiene and cleanliness, while still important, were no longer seen as indicators of moral virtue. Instead, inner purity, devotion to God, and spiritual discipline became the guiding principles of personal conduct. Yet, despite these shifts, the legacy of Roman cleanliness persisted. The concept of hygiene and the desire to keep one's appearance respectable remained deeply ingrained in European culture, even in the absence of the Phaulonice. As soap making spread throughout Europe and new methods of fabric care emerged, the principles of Roman laundry, using natural compounds to break down oils and grime, continue to influence later generations. The eventual development of modern laundry techniques, from washing machines to detergents, all trace their roots back to the Roman approach to fabric care, albeit in a much more advanced and efficient form. In the centuries following the fall of Rome, the importance of maintaining a respectable appearance, whether in clothing or in public conduct, continued to shape European society. The Renaissance, with its revival of classical Roman values, saw a renewed focus on physical appearance and cleanliness. Even as society became more focused on individualism and personal expression, the ideals of order, cleanliness, and discipline that had defined Roman society were reinterpreted during the Renaissance, and the legacy of the Phaulonici lived on in these new cultural movements. What's particularly interesting is that the Roman methods of laundry weren't lost entirely, they evolved. While we no longer rely on urine to clean our clothes, many of the principles of Roman fabric care are still in use today. Modern detergents, washing machines, and stain removers all rely on similar chemical principles to those used by the Romans, using solvents to break down oils and dirt, and agitation to ensure thorough cleaning. Even though we've moved beyond the labor-intensive methods of the Romans, the foundation they built still influences the ways we care for our clothing today. The Phaulonici, in a sense, represent the broader legacy of Roman ingenuity. They may have been small parts of the empire's infrastructure, but they were vital to the functioning of Roman society. Their decline coincided with the decline of the empire itself, but the principles they established for fabric care lived on in a more advanced and automated form. The Romans, with their resourcefulness and practical approach to life, left behind a legacy of innovation in laundry practices that would continue to evolve long after their empire had crumbled. So, as you reflect on the history of Roman laundry Remember that these seemingly trivial aspects of life, the cleaning of clothes, the upkeep of personal appearance, were far more than just mundane tasks. They were reflections of Roman culture, values, and societal structures. And even today, the principles they established still shape the way we care for our clothes, ensuring that their legacy endures as we near the end of our exploration of Roman laundry and the Fulonice. Let's take a moment to reflect on how this fascinating aspect of ancient Roman culture has influenced our world today, both in practical and cultural terms. The Romans' meticulous attention to cleanliness, their innovative use of resources like urine, and their creation of a sophisticated system for fabric care were not just about hygiene, they were emblematic of the Roman approach to life. And even as the empire fell and societal structure shifted, the legacy of these practices continues to echo through modern times. The decline of the Fulonice coincided with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, and though the methods used by the Romans slowly disappeared from the public eye, the principles behind them, resourcefulness, efficiency, and care remained deeply embedded in the fabric of European life. In many ways, the evolution of laundry practices in the medieval period and later in the modern age mirrors the journey from ancient Rome to the present. Soap making, the rise of personal hygiene in Christian monasticism, and the eventual development of modern washing machines all stem from the same need to keep clothing clean, to maintain order, and to present oneself in a respectable manner. But the most significant influence of Roman laundry practices may not lie in the methods themselves, but in the very concept of cleanliness as a social tool. The Romans understood that the way one presented themselves in public through clean clothing was an essential part of maintaining one's social standing. This idea that outward cleanliness reflects inner virtue and respectability has lasted through the centuries and remains integral to our daily lives. While we may not use urine to clean our clothes today, the desire for cleanliness and the importance of appearance still play a crucial role in our personal and societal interactions. In the modern world, the symbolism of clean clothing has only grown in importance. Whether we're preparing for a job interview, attending a social gathering, or simply going about our daily routines, we understand that our clothes are a reflection of who we are. The idea that cleanliness and appearance are connected to one's status and character still permeates society. And while we no longer rely on the Fulonice to maintain our clothes, we still seek out services, dry cleaners, laundromats, washing machines that allow us to present ourselves in a polished, respectable way. The desire to maintain that outward image of order and respectability is, in many ways, an extension of the Roman obsession with pristine clothing. In this light, the Fulonice were not just laundry facilities. They were integral to the maintenance of Roman society itself. They represented the empire's obsession with cleanliness, order, and status. But they also symbolized something deeper, how appearance and outward behavior shaped an individual's place in the social order. The workers of the Fulonice, the slaves who spent their days scrubbing and stomping in ammonia-filled vats were, in many ways, the hidden laborers who made this cultural framework possible. Though their contributions went largely unacknowledged, they were fundamental to the fabric of Roman identity. In considering the legacy of the Folonicae, it's clear that their influence extends far beyond the practicalities of laundry care. They played a role in shaping the values of cleanliness, status, and social order that have remained central to human societies throughout history. From the Romans' use of urine to clean their togas, to the development of modern detergents and washing machines, the principles of fabric care remain deeply rooted in our collective consciousness. While the specific practices may have changed, the cultural importance of cleanliness and the labor behind it has not. This enduring legacy speaks to the broader impact of Roman innovation. The Romans were not just great military strategists or builders of monumental structures, they were also deeply practical, finding ingenious solutions to everyday problems. The Folonicae, in all their gritty, ammonia-scented glory, were a testament to Roman ingenuity and resourcefulness. The use of urine, a substance most people would discard without a second thought, became an essential tool in maintaining the image of order and civility that defined Roman society. Today, as we load our clothes into washing machines or drop them off at the dry cleaners, it's easy to take for granted the simplicity and efficiency of modern laundry care. But the next time you're folding your clothes or pulling a fresh shirt out of the dryer, take a moment to think about the long, winding road from the Folonicae to the laundry room. The Romans, with their resourcefulness, left behind a legacy that continues to shape how we care for our clothes, maintain our image, and engage with the world around us. And as you lie down to rest, thinking about the ancient Romans and their inventive laundry practices, remember that every garment you wear, every stain you fight to remove, and every wrinkle you smooth out is part of a long history of human ingenuity. From the Folonicae to modern laundry, the care of clothing has always been about more than just dirt removal. It's about presenting oneself to the world, maintaining social order, and ultimately projecting an image of respectability and civility. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let your mind wander through the bustling streets of ancient Rome, the smell of ammonia wafting from the Folonicae, and the knowledge that the simple task of washing clothes has always been about much more than keeping fabric clean. It's about identity, status, and the very foundation of society itself. Sweet dreams.